Hi there. Welcome to or welcome back to Tiff Books, where I read books and I talk to you about them. It has been a little while since I filmed down here. I'm in the process of redoing my shelves, so some of them are a little bare, but we're gonna go with it because I'm really liking the way it's looked, and I thought we would do something new-ish, go back to something old. So I thought today I would talk to you a little bit about a book I recently read called Hideous Progeny and just give you like a mini review and why I think you should read it. I have been doing these like 30-second reels on Instagram. They've been kind of fun and I might start putting them on here. Or you can go to my Instagram at the Auto Readers, which I share with my best friend, and check out the reels over there. There's only like 3 of them up now, but I've done this book for one of them. So, Hideous Progeny. I picked it up because somebody on Instagram last year shared a picture of the cover and was like, my current read, and I was like, oh my god, this cover. And so I looked it up, and it's inspired by Frankenstein, but it is from a woman's perspective, and she is a distant relative of Victor Frankenstein. And I put it on my TBR, and recently my library was like, hey, you want to read this on Libby on audio? And I was like, you know what? I do. So I'll start off by saying the audiobook quality is really, really good. The audio narrator does a fantastic job. It's set in England, London, and like England, mostly London, but a little bit on some cities outside of London, and also a little bit in Scotland, in Inverness. And the voice actor has a very lovely accent that works really well for the characters and the time setting. So this is set in where is it set? The late 1800s. Jesus Christ. So this is set in the late 1800s, and we're following a character named Mary. And Mary is the great grandniece of Victor Frankenstein. She doesn't know this in the beginning of the book, and she doesn't really know who he is. She knows that her father's last name is Frankenstein and that she doesn't share her father's last name. She was raised by her grandmother as an illegitimate child. Her mother was a housekeeper, and so she was given her mother's last name of Brown as she was growing up. And because of where we're at in time and society, she had very little prospects growing up and very little ability to increase herself like past her station. And her grandmother didn't really seem to like her, so she didn't really have the greatest childhood. This is a very slow historical, almost literary with some speculative aspects type of novel. So we were following Mary for quite a long time. And during her childhood, she develops this really good friendship with her neighbor, Catherine, who is a little bit more affluent. Catherine is from France, but she's living in White to increase her English as a young child. And she becomes really good friends with Mary. And we get a little bit of like their friendship as they're growing up. Mary is very, very interested in the sciences, specifically the geological and paleontological sciences. And this starts off by what she thinks is a rock that she found on the beach. And this is how she meets Catherine. Catherine's like, oh, I know what you have. And she like climbs over the fence and shows her little book. And she's like, look, it's this. And it's it's a fossil of some sort. But it's broken because a little boy on the beach tried to take it from her. And this was kind of Mary's first inkling of like, a man will always try to take a cool find from you. So we are very much setting up for a feminine rage type novel. It's a little more of like a gentle rage. It's like a feminine irritation, like strong irritation. But I felt some deep like anger moments throughout this. So one of the other things that starts happening is we get this inkling that Mary likes Catherine a bit more than as a friend. But she can't really express this, partially because of her inability to put words to it, and also the time setting that we're in. And so she knows that it would be not something that she could express and still be accepted by society. So she kind of has like been pushing those feelings down for an extended period of her life. As Mary ages, though, she gets mentored by Catherine's, I believe, uncle, who she refers to as Mr. Jamset G. He is a man from India, which is at the time in this book colonized by Britain. So we get some discussions of colonization, of racism, and also, heavily of sexism as well. So he mentors her, and he is a member of one of the academic societies. I believe it's the Royal Society. And he is the only member of color of the society. And he is actually based on, when I was listening to the author's note, he's based on a real person who was the first man of color to be accepted into one of the Royal Societies. So he's mentoring her, and she's kind of learning about the issues with the society through his eyes, and also through the experiences that she's having with these men who are just disregarding her, not really wanting to speak to her, and having to learn how to like quell down her anger, because she is a very reactionary person who tends to speak her mind, and that's not necessarily going to get her ahead in her situation. I'm going to stop trying to say in the time we're in, because even now, right? So she has a few outbursts at social gatherings, which are at the time, with social gatherings which are really important to her being able to be accepted in this part of society. After one of her outbursts, she gets chased down on her way out by this man called something Sutherland. Do I remember his first name right now? Henry Sutherland. And Henry expresses his interest in having a discussion with her, having a conversation with her. And we kind of jump forward a little bit in time, and her and Henry end up married. And so this is like the first like 20% of the book, basically, ish, I think. There's a lot of character development. This is a heavily character-driven story with actually a fair amount of plot, but we spend a lot of time with our character learning all about her. This is kind of told through flashbacks. So you know me, this is a spoiler channel. I do spoilers. So very mild spoilers. Mary and Henry end up kind of disgraced from the Royal Society, and in trying to get back into society and a stable economic situation, because Henry has gambled away all of their money, they try to come up with a few different projects, and Mary ends up going back through this old kind of binder type thing that she has from her father, and there are letters in there to her great uncle, and they are all about Victor Frankenstein's monster and when it was chased across the Arctic. But there's tons of notes in there as well where she can kind of piece together what he did. And Mary and her husband Henry, who is a paleontologist, have an idea to make a creature based on these notes. So now here's where I get into some spoilers. Essentially, we're spending all of our time in Mary's head and seeing all of this through her eyes. Henry starts out as a fairly good man-ish. Like, the bar is on the ground and he's like just barely above it, right? So he's kind to her, he listens to her, he likes having conversations with her, he values her intellectually. As the story goes on, though, either he starts or she starts noticing that he takes little jabs at her, and he tends to claim the things that she does for himself, and she'll never be as accepted as he is. This is kind of spurred on by a man that she didn't know that Henry was friends with from college, whose name I also cannot remember. I was just trying to see if I could remember it. I don't remember it, but I remember that I hated this man. I hated him. He was like the epitome of shit men. And it kind of gives us this like insight into Henry being a shit man by association and dismissing everything that Mary is saying about this man and how he's treated her. He talks down to her about her being illegitimate, her not coming from wealth, her being a woman, like all of that stuff. And then he starts going on these like racist tirades, and Mary ends up not being able to stand it and throws a glass of wine in his face, which I thought was fucking hilarious. And of course, Henry sides with this guy and just disregards her feelings and doesn't even ask her why she would do it. And that's when things start kind of spiraling. But they haven't started making this monster yet. So they end up going up to his deceased father's house to stay with his sister, Maisie. And Mary and Maisie end up being like really good friends. And Henry hates his sister because she has a chronic illness, and he views her as wasting money because of her chronic illness. So we also have a conversation about disability and the judgy ass shit people say about people who have a chronic illness. So there are so many layers of like societal bullshit packed into this book where I was just so mad for Maisie and Mary throughout most of this book. Both the men were shit because after they start working on their creature and Mary gets it figured out, she's the one who figures it all out. Henry's finds out that Henry borrowed money from that shit man that she threw a glass of wine in his face. So he shows up and he starts helping with the project by buying a bunch of equipment. And when they finally make this creature, Mary is the only one who wants to spend time with it. So her and the creature make this like really cute little bond of like a person and a pet bond. And those two men shit all over it and are like, oh, you're just using it to replace your child that you don't have. And I was like, girl, if you stab them right now, I will not be mad, because I was mad. I was so mad at these men. I was like on Instagram being like, I hate these men. I hate these men. Like, oh my God. They were dismissive. They were going to write the paper without her, not including her name on it. None of that. And basically they were both going to claim all of the like discoveries that she made for themselves. And I just like, I was ready to go to the mat for her. So after they start doing this, this man, whose name I can't remember, I feel like just calling him Todd, fucking steals her creation and runs off with it in the middle of the night. So Maisie ends up being the one to figure out where he went, because she's just like in the background and everyone ignores her. And also Henry wanted to marry off Maisie to this man to forgive his debts, because she had money that he's not allowed to, because his dad was like, my son is not touching my money. I'm giving it all to my daughter. And Henry was pissed off about that because he's the man. He should have the money. And it's such bullshit. So they end up going on this like quest to chase down this monster, which results in a gunfight. And the monster just kind of like ends up trying to protect Mary and attacks this fucking piece of shit Todd. I don't know what his name is. Todd just sounds like, I think of the Todd on Scrubs, if you're old like me. Like, he is like that type of just chauvinistic piece of shit. It's just, ugh. So they end up with this whole monster thing. All the while, Mary is kind of grappling with the fact that she really cares about Maisie, like really cares about Maisie. And Henry is kind of just spiraling into being more and more of a piece of shit, man. And it's all these discussions. I won't spoil the actual ending for you, because I think the ending is kind of satisfactory, and it was just like, it wasn't like a big moment, but it was satisfactory. And I think it's such a good, slow journey of discussions of academia and all of the socio-political bullshit that happens inside of them. And I know like this is set in the late 1800s, but this shit still happens. You can see it at conferences. It's wild that it still happens today. We talk a lot about how to be a good scientist in this time, to be a respected scientist, not necessarily a good scientist, but to be a respected scientist, you have to like have money, because that's really the only way that you can do your research. And I mean, we still have that now. We don't have a lot of self-funded research, but if you want to get your education to be involved in this, you have to have money to get there, or you have to be willing to take on massive student debt. It's just the only way that you can do it. And so there's this like, we talk about the meritocracy within science, but there is it's not as much of a meritocracy as white men want you to think it is. It's really not. There is very much a socioeconomic hierarchy within academia and the sciences. And I think this was just kind of one of those stories. I've read a few of them recently that I've really enjoyed. I think A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher does this as well. It talks a lot about money and academia in a lighthearted way. And I was like, oh, T. Kingfisher gets it. And I think there's just, this one, Our Hideous Progeny, does it really well. Also, I was kind of disappointed that they were in Inverness and they were making a plesiosaur, and we didn't do the Loch Ness Monster. Like, I really, really wanted a Loch Ness Monster story. Like, that's That's what I wanted out of this. I really like the way that it went, but I really wanted a Loch Ness Monster story. So this is, I just wanted to like talk about this a little bit. I've been branching out with my genres lately, and this was very much a historical fiction, but with some speculative elements. It was a little bit elements of sci-fi, a little elements of fantasy. There was, you know, we have a chase scene, we like of them like trying, like a little mystery of like, where did he go? How did he get it? Like, who's, like, you know, a little crime adventure. And like, it was just really good. I will say too, though, if you are sensitive at all to the loss of a child, there is a big background element of that in this, where Mary had a stillbirth, and it kind of the grief and loss from that kind of runs as background throughout the story. And some of that is an interesting conversation, because she realizes partway through that a lot of the grief that she felt is that her having a child was her one shot at being a normal woman and having, you know, a husband and a kid, and not being different in, one, her attraction to women, and two, her desire to be in the sciences. So some of the grief that she was feeling was for the loss of the future she thought she was supposed to have, and she thought it would fix her. So there are some heavier discussions in here. If those are things that would bother you, I don't know if this will work for you, but I would recommend checking out the content warnings on Storygraph. I always recommend that for pretty much every book, because so many things come out of nowhere in books these days. Like, it's just so many things come out of nowhere sometimes. And if you have things that you do know bother you, Storygraph has a really good system for marking content warnings. When you click on content warnings, it'll pop up the top 3 that users have added, but you can click expand and see everyone from the list that they have, and you can see how many people have flagged it for graphic, moderate, or mild depictions of those topics. So I think it's really, really useful if you want to look at content warnings. I find it fun sometimes to look at content warnings. I will say real quick though, one that I thought was really funny was when I was reading The Only Good Indians, somebody flagged it for cultural appropriation, and I just still like it's Stephen Graham Jones, it's Blackfeet, and he was writing about Blackfeet, and it made me laugh that was flagged for cultural appropriation. I was like, you guys. So anyway, that's all I've got for you today. I will see you soon.